So today I thought I'd do a video on me replacing the linkage on my Cruz Nomad. So what I'll do is I'll go through all the tools I'm going to use, the parts I'm going to replace, and then I'll show you through the steps to replace them. So first of all, on the tools, I'm going to start with some Allen keys. You're going to need a 6, 5 and an 8mm Allen key to take the linkage off. I'm just going to be using the grease gun which comes with the Santa Cruz. I'm just using cheap bike grease on this. Some additional grease for putting onto the axles. Obviously some wipes for cleaning up. And a rag of some sort just to catch any debris and all the mud when you clean that out. So we'll get onto the actual parts I'm going to be replacing. So I'm going to be replacing the upper link. This is a fully complete link which I purchased with the new bearings fitted already. You can get tools obviously and fit your own bearings if you want, but I've just taken the path of least resistance. And then the lower link, which is the one with the grease port. And then I'm replacing all of the axles. You'll see the wear on the ones that I've got in once I take them out. And then these are just the bearing covers. So I'll go up to the bike now and I'll show you where I'm going to start. Okay, so the first step is to take all of the air out of your shock. Then we're going to take the lower bolt out of the shock so the linkage is free, so you can see what it's like. So you just need your 6mm Allen key. Just undo the shock bolt. This is much easier when the shock is empty. So move that out of place. You'll see the linkage move. This is where you can tell straight away what the linkage is just not smooth at all. It's sticking in places. So the next step is to start taking the actual axles out. So I always start at the bottom. Okay, so the next step is I'm going to be taking off the chainstay axle. So you need a 5mm Allen key to start. And you just unscrew this. Be careful, there is a washer in here. So if you're going to be reusing the axle, you're going to have to make sure you don't lose it. So this comes out in 3 bits. So you've got the bolt, you see there, the washer, and then I'm not sure exactly what it's called, but it's basically a spacer which expands out into the axle. If you know, please feel free to comment what it's actually called. Then you're going to need the 8mm Allen key to get the axle out. These can sometimes be pretty stiff. Oh, one other thing, if this part is actually stuck, what you can use is a 6mm Allen key to pull it out. It came out pretty easy there, but sometimes they can get stuck. Just undo this. This is probably going to be pretty filthy in here. It should just come out fairly easily. So it gets, you can push it from the other side, yeah, and it's getting stuck. Just use this to get some purchase on it. Right, then the axle comes out. Sounds like that bearing is completely collapsed, but we'll see. So here's the axle. As you can see, there's quite a large amount of wear on this one, so I'm just not going to risk it. I'm just going to replace the whole thing. So I'm going to do that procedure for the other 2 links. So the other one is here, and then the other one is on the reverse of this upper link. It's the same procedure, so they're all the same. It is helpful to do this in a bike stand. Unfortunately I don't have one, so I'm just making do with what I've got. So I'll get all these out and then I'll show you what the actual frame looks like and where you need to clean. So here's what the space looks like where the actual lower link goes. You're going to have to make sure you clean this out, because this is basically like a mud pocket that sits right above the link, and mine was particularly filthy. But to clean that out, inspect for any damage, make sure the carbon's not chipped or anything there, and then what we're going to do is just replace it with the link. So I've got the link here that came out of the bike, which is, as you can see, pretty filthy. And then when you take the bearing covers off, you can see that the bearing is actually disintegrated completely. Axle's got a bit of damage on it, so I'm going to clean this up and then I'll replace the bearings in it at a later date. So I shall get the new link fitted. Okay, so once the area is clean, what you're going to do is get your new lower link. You can take one of the axles. The two lower ones use the same size one, the upper one is slightly longer. So what you need to do is fit this link in. It can be put in the other way. So this little nut here goes towards the front triangle, and then the grease port goes to the back. So it's going to pop the bearing covers on, and then you just literally slide the link into place. And then this is where I use the other grease. I add a small amount of grease to the actual axle before I put it in. I'm going to re-grease it once it's actually in place. You can't use the grease gun till it's actually got some pressure on it. So what I'll do is I'll just grease this up. So just add a small amount of grease on here. I'm using the Juice Lubes one, which I found is the stickiest one. It manages to repel most of the water and dirt out of here, because this area is particularly prone to collecting mud and getting pretty filthy. So once you've got your axle done, just going to slide it into place. And then it's just a case of doing the reverse of what you did to take it off. So now I've got that second axle in. Just as I say, left it free floating like that. There's not any real tension on the axles. I'll do all of that once I've got the next link in. Okay, so yeah, I've got the axle off the upper link, and then I just need to remove these bearing covers on the part that attaches to the main front triangle. Just before I finish on here, as you can see how much rust is on this bearing, so definitely check these pretty regularly if you can. I've stupidly let mine lapse for a couple of weeks, so I now have to deal with the consequences of it. One thing more to note on the upper link is you've got these little inserts which sit under the bearing, under the smaller bearings. They're tapered on one side, and then they just sit actually on the bearing there, so it sits on the race, which allows it to rotate. Also gives it the spacing for the frame. So do not lose these. So once they're clean, I'm just going to pop them back in the actual frame. It's pretty straightforward with this. It's just these bearing covers, which just literally go over there, and the pedal insert. I forgot to say, so this upper link, it has these bearing covers as well. I forgot to get new ones, but there's not too much wearing on these. There's just a bit of anodizing removed. So these just pop over the lower set of the upper link bearings. the ones where the axle attaches. So what I like to do on these bearings, I like to put a small amount of grease just inside here, not on the actual race part, but just on the inside, which helps with the well, helps protect it from when it gets wet, because obviously these just help seal it a tiny bit more. So just another bit of grease in there, and then I'll wipe the race clear and then pop it back on. Same with the top link one with the bearing covers. I like to put just a little bit of grease in there just to help keep the water out. Okay, so now I've got all the axles back in. I've left the the end bolts for the final tightening out and left the shock disconnected. This is where it's helpful, because you're going to have to set the torque on these. Now there is set specs for them, but what I've found best way to treat them is like they're a headset, so you don't want to over tighten them, you also don't want to under tighten them. So what you want is a nice smooth get the bolts as tight as you can. So I'll show you what it looks like once you stiffen it up. So I'll over tighten this one slightly, and then the back, you can feel it pulling. It gets slightly too stiff. So just take that back off just a bit. It comes back to nice and smooth. You want to have it maybe slightly over what you would want it, because it is going to ease off once you start riding it, and you may have to come back and tighten them back up again. But I find this is the best way to do it. Once you've got a nice smooth action on the links, then when you're happy with that, you just add your 5mm back in with the washer. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grease the lower link bearings. This is the one that takes all the abuse. I usually grease mine, well, I use it quite a lot in pretty bad condition, so recently I've been doing it once a week, but I'd say check it at least once a month, depending on how much you ride. So it just pushes in place. Just hold some pressure on the grease. Hold it, make sure you hold it straight, because otherwise what tends to happen is all the grease just comes out into this bottom port. So, and then just keep pressing it. You'll hear it pushing in, and it's just going to fill the gap between the bearings and the axle. And you'll know when you've got there, because you'll see the grease will start coming out of the side of the bearings. It takes quite a large amount of it to start with. Obviously this is a new link, so it didn't have any in at all. Keep going, right. So I'll just move you to here. You can see it starting to come out of the bearings. Here, here. And it will come out here and here as well. So once you've got that, just literally remove the gun and then wipe off the excess, because that obviously attracts filth. Okay, so now I've got all the parts back on and it's all together. The shock's mounted back up, obviously without air, and you just check that it's running nice and smooth all the way through its travel. It's not notchy, not sticking anywhere. It's also an idea where you've got the shock off is to check the mounting hardware, just to make sure there's no wear on it. The top one can usually get particularly prone to seizing, which can ruin the small bump sensitivity on the bike. So it's always worth checking it. But this feels nice and smooth, although it could do with a clean. So what I'm going to do is I'll get my wheels back on and get the shock inflated. So anyway, there's a video on how to replace the linkage on a Santa Cruz Nomad. As I said before, it's much easier to do it in a bike stand, but you can do it without. It's not a big job, it only takes about half an hour to do it. If you've got any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the box below. Thumbs up are always appreciated, and thanks again for watching.